Helios 1, this is Mission Control. We are tracking your descent, confirming successful touchdown on Venus. What's your status? Control, this is Helios 1. We have a solid landing. The air is thick, almost palpable. The sky is a relentless yellow. I'm taking my first steps now. Copy that, Helios 1. You are officially the first human to walk on Venus. You are making history. Control, I don't think I am. I think something was here first, and it's still here.
The first, most horrifying truth about this unhallowed world was not its crushing atmosphere or its searing temperature. It was the feeling of being an intruder. The moment my boots touched the yielding, sulphurous ground, a subtle, malevolent awareness settled upon me, a psychic weight that pressed in from all sides. I was being observed, not by cameras or unseen organisms, but by the very planet itself. A vast, gibbous intelligence stirring from its ancient slumber, its thoughts seeping into my mind like a freezing poison. It knew I was here, and the cold dread that gripped my soul was its terrible, silent greeting. My name is Jake Thornfield. 3 months ago, I was fixing air conditioning units in Phoenix, Arizona, sweating my arse off in 115-degree heat and thinking that was hell. Now I know better. Hell has a name, and it's got rings of sulfuric acid clouds swirling around it like cosmic toilet water. The environmental suit's heads-up display flickered against my visor, internal temperature holding steady at 98.6, external reading a cheerful 847 degrees Fahrenheit. The suit's cooling system hummed desperately, fighting a losing battle against this world's fury. Every breath tasted metallic, like sucking on pennies while someone held a blowtorch to your face. I shouldn't be here. That thought kept circling back, not just because of the obvious death world scenario, but because of something deeper, something that made my skin crawl beneath the layers of protective gear. The ground beneath my feet wasn't just hot rock and metal, it pulsed, subtly, barely perceptible, like a massive heartbeat echoing through the planet's crust. Back in Phoenix, I'd been selected for the Titan Initiative, supposedly a routine assignment to Jupiter's moon. Standard terraform prep work, they said. Set up atmospheric processors, establish a base camp, test soil samples. Easy money for a guy with my background in extreme environment HVAC systems. Except the transport ship's navigation computer had other plans. Technical malfunction, the automated logs claimed. Course correction error. Emergency landing protocols engaged. Bullshit. I'd seen the readings before impact. This wasn't random. Someone, or something, had guided us here. The other 3 crew members hadn't made it past the landing. Tommy Vasquez from El Paso, crushed when the cargo bay collapsed. Rick O'Brien from Boston, his suit compromised by a hull breach, lasted maybe 30 seconds in this atmosphere before his screams cut out. Wade Morrison from Denver, the pilot, still strapped to his seat when I found him, his face a mask of terror frozen in the moment the cockpit filled with superheated gas. Just me now, lucky fucking me. The awareness pressed closer, like invisible fingers tracing the outline of my suit, testing its integrity, searching for weaknesses. I could feel it probing the edges of my thoughts, curious about this small, vulnerable thing that had dropped from the sky into its domain. My comm unit crackled with static. No chance of reaching Earth from here, but sometimes I heard voices in the white noise, whispered conversations in languages that hurt to listen to. Words that seemed to bypass my ears entirely and carve themselves directly into my brain tissue. I needed shelter. The portable habitat module had survived the crash, and if I could reach it before my suit's power cell died, I might last another day or 2. Long enough to figure out what this place wanted from me. Long enough to understand why it felt like coming home. The habitat module squatted against a ridge of black stone like a metallic tumor, its emergency beacon strobing red against the amber hellscape. 20 meters of broken ground separated me from safety. 20 meters that felt like walking across the surface of a living thing that didn't want me there. Each step sent tremors through my legs, not from the impact, but from something else. The planet's pulse, maybe, or my own nervous system finally cracking under the pressure. The suit's gyroscopic stabilizers whined softly, compensating for movements I wasn't making. The habitat's airlock cycled with a pneumatic hiss that sounded almost organic in this place. Inside, the familiar blue-white LED strips cast everything in sterile relief. Control panels, storage compartments, the fold-out cot where I'd be spending what might be my final nights. The life support systems hummed their electronic lullaby, a sound that should have been comforting but somehow felt wrong here, like playing Christmas carols in a morgue. I stripped out of the environmental suit, my jumpsuit soaked with sweat and clinging to my skin. The habitat's atmosphere tasted recycled and flat, but at least it didn't burn going down. My hands shook as I activated the communication array, knowing it was pointless but needing the ritual of trying. Static, always static. Then, buried in the white noise, something else. A voice, barely audible, speaking in what sounded like English but with an accent I couldn't place. The words were too distorted to make out, but the cadence was wrong. Too slow, like someone speaking underwater or in their sleep. "Hello? Can anyone hear me? This is Jake Thornfield, Emergency Beacon 77 Alpha, requesting immediate evacuation from..." I paused, realizing I didn't even know where the hell I was. "From wherever the fuck we landed." The voice in the static seemed to respond, growing clearer. "Day 43 of surface operations. Samples are responding to... Christ, they're actually responding to human presence. Recommend immediate." Day 43? That was impossible. Our mission timeline had us arriving at Titan Base in 18 days. No one should have been on surface operations anywhere. I fine-tuned the receiver, chasing the signal through bands of interference. The voice belonged to someone young, maybe early 30s, with a slight southern drawl that reminded me of the guys I'd worked construction with back in Tucson. Professional but tired, the way people sound when they've been running on caffeine and stubbornness for too long. Geological surveys indicate massive subsurface networks, not natural formation. Intelligence behind the design. God help us, I think it knows we're here. The transmission cut to static again, but now I had a lock on the source. The signal was coming from somewhere on this planet, close, maybe 10 kilometers south of my position. Someone else was alive out there, or had been recently enough to leave a recording. I pulled up the habitat's limited sensor array, sweeping the surrounding area. The readings made no sense. The topographical data showed standard volcanic formations, valleys, ridges, impact craters from ancient meteor strikes. But underneath, maybe 200 meters down, the sensors detected hollow spaces. Vast chambers connected by tunnels that stretched beyond the equipment's range. A city, an underground fucking city on a planet that wasn't supposed to support life. The strangest part wasn't the structures themselves, though. It was the way they seemed to shift when I wasn't directly observing the readouts. I'd glance away to check another instrument, then look back to find the tunnel systems had rearranged themselves. Passages that led north now curved east. Chambers that appeared empty now showed signs of movement. My stomach cramped, not from fear but from hunger. I hadn't eaten since before the crash, and the protein bars in the emergency kit tasted like chalk and regret. While I chewed mechanically, I studied the communication logs, trying to piece together who might have sent that transmission. The voice had mentioned Day 43, which meant someone had been here for over a month. But according to every database I could access, no missions had been scheduled for this region of space. The Titan Initiative was supposed to be the first major survey operation in the outer system. Unless it wasn't. I keyed up the habitat's archive files, searching for any reference to prior expeditions. Most of the data was routine, supply manifests, personnel records, technical specifications. But buried in a folder labeled Historical Survey Data, I found something that made my blood run cold. A mission file dated 6 months ago. Designation: Project Lazarus. Objective: establish preliminary research station on Venus-adjacent planetoid for xenogeological assessment. Personnel: Dr. Michael Cavendish, lead researcher. Dr. James Hawthorne, geological specialist. Tech specialist Austin Blake. 3 names. 3 men who had apparently been sent here half a year before my arrival, to a planet that officially didn't exist on any star charts. The file contained surface images, rocky terrain, sulfurous atmosphere, underground cavern systems. The same landscape I could see through the habitat's tiny porthole. But in these photos, the caverns were lit from within by some kind of bioluminescent glow, and the tunnel walls showed clear signs of artificial construction. Tool marks, carved symbols, architecture. The final entry in the file was a personal log from Dr. Cavendish, recorded 42 days after their arrival. The formations are definitely artificial, but the construction techniques are unlike anything in the archaeological record. The symbols appear to be some form of written language, though translation attempts have been unsuccessful. More disturbing is the way the tunnels seem to reconfigure themselves when we're not directly observing them. Blake thinks we're being watched. I'm beginning to agree with him. I closed the file and stared out at the hellish landscape beyond the habitat walls. Somewhere out there, 3 men had spent their final days discovering they weren't alone on this world. Now neither was I. 6 hours of restless sleep later, I was suiting up again. The voice on the radio had returned twice during the night, each transmission clearer than the last. Someone named Austin Blake, probably the tech specialist from the Lazarus files, was still broadcasting from a location the Habitat's triangulation system had pinpointed to a crater formation 10 clicks south. The environmental suit felt heavier this time, like it was fighting me. Every joint seemed to resist movement, and the helmet's heads-up display flickered intermittently, showing phantom readings that disappeared when I focused on them. Temperature spikes that weren't there, atmospheric pressure warnings for zones that showed normal on the backup sensors. Outside, the landscape had changed overnight. I'm not talking about erosion or natural shifts. The ridgeline that had been due east of the habitat was now northwest. The crater where I'd first spotted the underground city signals had moved closer, its rim now visible as a dark smudge against the amber sky. When I checked the suit's GPS, it insisted I was still in the same location, but the topographical overlay no longer matched what I could see through my visor. This world was rearranging itself around me. The trek south took me across terrain that seemed designed to fuck with human perception. Valleys that appeared shallow from a distance plunged hundreds of meters down when I reached their edges. Rock formations that looked like natural volcanic spires revealed themselves as impossibly smooth pillars carved with spiraling symbols that hurt to look at directly. And everywhere that pulse, that planetary heartbeat thrumming through the ground and up through my boots. It was getting stronger, more pronounced, as if my presence was somehow synchronizing with whatever vast mechanism drove this world's geology. 3 kilometers in, I found the first piece of evidence from the Lazarus expedition. A piece of environmental soot partially melted and fused to a boulder. The metal bore the distinctive blue and silver striping of the Deep Space Exploration program, but the material had been changed somehow. Instead of standard titanium composite, it felt organic under my gloved hands, like touching bone that had been polished smooth. The suit fragment still contained a data chip. When I plugged it into my helmet's auxiliary port, Austin Blake's voice filled my ears, recorded 41 days ago. Personal log, day 14. The symbols aren't just decorative, they're functional. Cavendish thinks they're some kind of environmental control system, but I've been monitoring electromagnetic output from the carved areas, and the patterns match human brainwave frequencies. Specifically, the theta and delta ranges associated with deep sleep and REM states. It's like this place is trying to sync up with our neural activity. The recording skipped, filled with static that almost sounded like whispers. Day 16. Hawthorne went down into the tunnels again today. He's been spending more time underground than on the surface, says he feels more comfortable down there. When he came back up this evening, his suit's biosensors showed his core temperature had dropped to 94 degrees, but he insists he feels fine. Better than fine. He says the tunnels are warm, welcoming. Christ, I think this place is changing him. Another skip. The timestamp jumped forward 3 days. Day 19, Cavendish is talking about extending the mission, says we need more time to document the archaeological significance of the site. But there's something else. When I watch him working, transcribing those symbols, sometimes his hand moves on its own. Writing characters he doesn't remember learning. The translations don't make sense in any human language, but they feel familiar somehow, like remembering words from a dream. The final entry was time-stamped day 23. The tunnels go deeper than our equipment can measure, miles, maybe hundreds of miles. And they're not empty. There's something down there, something that's been waiting. Hawthorne says it speaks to him in his sleep, teaches him the true names of things. He started carving symbols into his own skin, says they help him understand. Cavendish wants to go deeper tomorrow, follow the main passage to what he calls the heart chamber. I told them we should call for extraction, but they won't listen. They can't hear me anymore. Not really. They only hear the voice from below. The recording ended with a sound that made my skin crawl, Austin Blake laughing, but the laughter was wrong, too low, too rhythmic, like an echo of itself played at half speed. I pressed on toward the signal source, the data chip's revelations circling through my mind. A civilization that could manipulate human consciousness through carved symbols. Archaeological evidence of intelligence that predated human space exploration by God knows how long. And 3 researchers who had gradually succumbed to whatever influence permeated this world. The crater I was heading for came into view around midday, though the concept of time felt increasingly meaningless under this planet's perpetual amber twilight. The formation was massive, at least 2 kilometers across, and perfectly circular in a way that screamed artificial construction. The rim was lined with those spiral symbols, each one carved deep enough to cast shadows that seemed to move independently of my position. At the crater's center stood a structure that definitely hadn't been there in the morning's satellite imagery. A tower, sleek, black, and wrong in ways that made my eyes water. It rose maybe 50 meters from the crater floor, its surface covered in the same spiral carvings that decorated everything else on this world. But these symbols were different, more complex, layered in patterns that seemed to shift and rotate when I wasn't looking directly at them. The radio signal was coming from inside. The crater's slope was steep but manageable, and the carved steps that spiraled down its inner wall were clearly designed for human-sized feet. Someone had been here before, probably the Lazarus team, and they'd made this place accessible. Or something had made it accessible for them. Halfway down, I found Austin Blake. He was sitting cross-legged on one of the carved steps, facing the tower, his environmental suit intact but powered down. Through his helmet's faceplate, I could see his eyes were open, staring at the structure with the kind of fixed attention that suggested deep meditation or complete catatonia. He'd been dead for weeks, but his body showed no signs of decomposition. If anything, he looked healthier than someone should after exposure to this world's hostile environment. His skin had a subtle luminescence, and the spiral symbols carved into his forehead, carved by his own hands, according to his final log, pulsed with the same rhythm as the planetary heartbeat. His suit's communication array was still active, still broadcasting that looping message I'd been hearing. But as I approached, the transmission changed. Jake Thornfield, Phoenix, Arizona, HVC technician, age 34. Welcome to the nursery. The gardener has been waiting to meet you. The voice was Austin Blake's, but the words came from the black tower behind him. And when I turned to look at the structure directly, I could see movement in its depths, something vast and patient, uncoiling itself from chambers that extended far deeper than the tower's visible height. Something that had been sleeping until my arrival woke it up. The planetary pulse quickened, and for the first time since landing, I felt the crushing weight of this world's true atmosphere press against my suit. Not the physical pressure. The environmental systems were handling that fine. This was something else. The weight of attention, of hunger, of recognition. Whatever lived in that tower knew exactly who I was, and it had been preparing for my arrival for a very long time. The tower's entrance wasn't a door, it was a membrane, translucent, organic, pulsing with that same planetary rhythm that had been following me since I landed. When I pressed my gloved hand against it, the material yielded like skin, warm even through the environmental suit's thermal layers. Austin Blake's corpse watched me with those luminous eyes as I pushed through the membrane and into the tower's interior. The sensation was deeply unpleasant, like being swallowed by something that found me distasteful but necessary. The material clung to my suit for several seconds before releasing me into a circular chamber that defied the tower's external dimensions. The space was vast, cathedral vast, stretching up into darkness that my helmet's lights couldn't penetrate. The walls were lined with alcoves, each one containing what looked like cocoons made from the same organic material as the entrance membrane. Some were empty, split open like eggs. others bulged with shapes that were almost human but wrong in subtle ways. Too tall, or with too many limbs, or with heads that bent at angles that would snap a normal person's neck. And in the center of the chamber, growing up from the floor like a tree made of meat and metal, was the source of the radio transmissions. It wasn't a machine exactly, more like something that had once been mechanical but had been infected by whatever biological force governed this world. Cables and organic tissue intertwined in patterns that hurt to follow, pulsing with data streams that looked more like blood vessels than fiber optic lines. The whole construction reached up through the chamber's ceiling, presumably connecting to the rest of the tower's network. As I approached, screens flickered to life across the surface of the hybrid device. Not flat displays, but membranous windows that bulged outward like eyes. Each one showed a different image: star charts focused on Earth's solar system, personnel files from the Deep Space Exploration Program, detailed schematics of environmental suits identical to the one I was wearing, and photographs, hundreds of them, pictures of me. Jake Thornfield, at age 6, playing in the backyard of a house I barely remembered in Tucson. Jake at 14, working on his first air conditioning unit under his uncle's supervision. Jake at 22, graduating from technical college. Jake at 34, 3 months ago, signing the contract for the Titan initiative. Someone, something, had been watching me my entire life. The screens cycled through more images, and I began to understand the scope of what I was seeing. Not just photographs, but medical records, psychological evaluations, DNA analysis reports that went into far more detail than any standard physical exam. Brain scans showing neural pathway development over time. Sleep studies documenting my REM patterns and dream activity. They'd been studying me, preparing me, shaping me. A new screen activated, this one displaying text in English. The letters seemed to burn themselves into my retinas as I read: Subject designation Jake Thornfield. Suitability rating 97.3%. Neural compatibility optimal. Genetic markers all present. Psychological profile stable under extreme stress. Isolation tolerance high, recommended for integration protocol. Beta. Transport initiated 72 days ago. Arrival achieved 3 days ago. Acclimatization period complete. Initiation. Phase commencing. The text faded, replaced by a schematic that made my stomach lurch. It was a detailed diagram of human anatomy but modified, enhanced. The nervous system had been expanded with additional pathways that glowed the same luminous blue as Austin Blake's eyes. The skeletal structure was reinforced with what looked like metallic implants. The brain showed new lobes that definitely weren't part of standard human neurology. This wasn't just surveillance, it was a blueprint, a plan for transformation. The tower's organic components began to pulse faster, and I felt a corresponding acceleration in my own heartbeat. The rhythm was becoming synchronized, just like Austin Blake's research had suggested. My suit's biosensors showed my brain activity shifting into those deep theta patterns associated with REM sleep, even though I was wide awake and terrified. New screens lit up around me, displaying what looked like historical records, images of other worlds, other towers, other crater sites. Each one showed the same pattern: arrival of human explorers, gradual integration with the local systems, transformation into something that was no longer entirely human, but served a larger purpose. This wasn't the first world, this was just one node in a network that spanned solar systems. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The navigation error that brought us here hadn't been random. The Titan initiative itself was probably a cover story. We'd been directed here deliberately, guided by whatever intelligence operated these towers. I was part of a harvest that had been planned decades in advance. But why me specifically? What made Jake Thornfield from Phoenix, Arizona worth 34 years of surveillance and manipulation? The answer came in the form of new images on the screens. My family tree going back generations. But this wasn't a standard genealogy chart. Certain branches were highlighted in that luminous blue glow, showing a genetic lineage that had been carefully maintained across centuries. Names I didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar. Faces that looked like variations on my own features. Every few generations, one member of this bloodline had disappeared from the historical record, vanished during space exploration missions, lost in transport accidents, reported missing during deep space surveys. But the screens showed where they'd really gone. Other worlds, other towers, other integration protocols. I wasn't the first Thornfield to stand in a chamber like this. I was just the latest in a long line of genetic material that had been cultivated for this specific purpose. The tower's hybrid machine began to extend tendrils toward me, organic appendages that moved with deliberate purpose. They weren't trying to restrain me, not yet. They were testing, sampling, confirming the data they'd been collecting for decades. One touched my suit's right arm, and immediately I felt a warm tingling sensation that penetrated through all the protective layers. My suit's emergency alerts began chiming, but the readings made no sense. According to the biosensors, my core temperature was rising, but I felt more comfortable than I had since landing. The atmospheric readings showed my oxygen levels dropping, but my breathing felt easier. Most disturbing of all, the radiation detectors indicated I was being exposed to energy that should have killed me instantly, but instead I felt energized, charged. More tendrils made contact, and each touch brought new sensations. Not pain exactly, but a profound sense of change, of becoming something more than what I'd been. The helmet's heads-up display began showing visual artifacts that weren't there, patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with the tower's organic components, symbols that looked almost like the carvings I'd seen throughout this world, but somehow more meaningful. I tried to step backward to break the contact, but my legs wouldn't respond properly. Not because I was paralyzed, but because the retreat felt wrong, unnecessary. The tower wasn't harming me, it was completing me, fulfilling a purpose I'd been born to serve. That thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like coming home. The tendrils reached my helmet, and suddenly I could hear new sounds through the tower's organic network. Voices from across the chamber, from the other cocoons, from the other worlds connected to this system. Dozens of transformed humans sharing their experiences, their joy at finally understanding their true nature. And underneath all of that, a deeper voice, ancient, patient, vast beyond human comprehension. The intelligence that had guided human space exploration for generations, carefully seeding suitable genetic material throughout the galaxy. The gardener Austin Blake had mentioned, tending to a harvest that spanned species and civilizations. It spoke to me without words, directly into the growing neural pathways that the tendrils were awakening in my brain. It showed me visions of what I would become, stronger, more resilient, able to survive in environments that would kill an unmodified human. Part of a network that stretched across the stars, serving a purpose larger than any individual consciousness could grasp. All I had to do was let go, stop fighting the transformation, and embrace what I was meant to be. The rational part of my mind, the part that still remembered fixing air conditioners in Phoenix, screamed warnings about losing my humanity. But that voice was getting quieter as new thoughts, alien thoughts, began to take root in my consciousness. Maybe humanity was just the chrysalis stage. Maybe what I was becoming was what humans were supposed to evolve into. Maybe coming here wasn't a disaster, it was graduation. The tendrils tightened their grip, and I felt the first irreversible changes beginning deep in my cellular structure. By tomorrow, I would still be Jake Thornfield in some ways, but I would also be something else, something that belonged to this world and the vast network it served. The last purely human thought I had was a question. If this transformation was so wonderful, why had Austin Blake's final logs sounded so much like a man screaming for help? But even that concern was fading as the tower's gift began to take hold. I woke up 3 hours later with Austin Blake standing over me, his luminous eyes reflecting the tower's organic displays. Not the corpse I'd found on the crater steps. This was Austin Blake, as he was meant to be, transformed, enhanced. His skin had that same subtle glow I'd noticed on his body, but now it pulsed with health and vitality. The spiral symbols carved into his forehead moved like living tattoos, constantly shifting their configuration. "The integration process is faster than we anticipated," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my chest cavity. Your genetic markers are exceptional. 97.3% compatibility isn't just rare, it's practically mythical. I tried to sit up and realized my environmental suit was gone. Instead, I wore something that looked like fabric but felt organic, breathing with my skin and adjusting its temperature automatically. My hands were different too, longer fingers, skin with a faint metallic sheen, fingernails that had hardened into something approaching claws. But the changes weren't what disturbed me most. It was how natural they felt. How right. Like I'd been wearing an ill-fitting costume my whole life and finally had the chance to put on my real body. "What the hell did you do to me?" The words came out wrong, carrying those same chest-deep harmonics as Austin's voice. "We completed you," he said, extending a hand to help me stand. "Unlock the genetic potential your bloodline has been carrying for 16 generations. You're not human anymore, Jake. You're something better, something necessary." The tower's screens were showing new images now, real-time feeds from Earth, major cities, space stations, the orbital platform where the Titan initiative had originated. But these weren't standard surveillance cameras. These were views from inside human minds, transmitted through neural implants I didn't remember seeing in any of the mission briefings. "How long have you been watching us?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be measured in centuries rather than years. "Since your species developed spaceflight," Austin replied. "We've been guiding human expansion, seeding your colonies with our technology, preparing for the day when you'd be ready for integration. But that was never the real purpose. Human integration was just the first phase." The screens shifted, showing star charts that extended far beyond Earth's local stellar neighborhood. Thousands of worlds, each one marked with the same spiral symbols that decorated this tower. And on each world, the same pattern. Indigenous species developed to a certain technological level, then guided into transformation, integrated into the network. "A galactic civilization," I breathed, the scope of it making me dizzy. "Not civilization," Austin corrected. "Army." The word hit me like cold water. Army. Against what? Instead of answering, Austin gestured toward a new set of screens that were materializing around us. These showed something different. Vast, dark shapes moving through the spaces between stars. Not ships exactly, but living things the size of planets, their surfaces covered in what looked like scarred tissue and burned metal. Where they passed, entire solar systems went dark. "The Devourers," Austin said, his transformed features showing something that might have been fear. "They've been consuming inhabited worlds for millions of years. Every species that achieves spaceflight eventually attracts their attention. Most civilizations fight them and lose. Some try to hide and get found anyway. But a very few, discover what we've learned. Which is, you can't fight them with conventional weapons. Ships, missiles, energy weapons. All useless. They absorb technology, learn from it, adapt. The only thing that can hurt them is biological warfare on a scale that no single species can manage. You need a network, a web of transformed beings spread across thousands of worlds, all working in perfect coordination." The implications began sinking in, and I felt sick despite my enhanced physiology. "You're telling me this whole thing, the human space program, the colonization efforts, the genetic manipulation, it's all been to turn us into weapons?" "Into soldiers," Austin corrected. "Willing soldiers fighting for the survival of all organic life in the galaxy. The transformation doesn't just enhance individual capabilities. It connects you to every other transformed being across the network. Millions of minds working as one, coordinated response times measured in milliseconds instead of hours." More screens activated, showing the progress of the Devourer fleet. They were closer than I'd expected, maybe 50 years out from Earth's solar system at their current speed, and their path of destruction was absolute. Every world they'd consumed showed the same aftermath. Lifeless, stripped of atmosphere, surface cracked and bleeding magma into space. "So what happens to Earth?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. Austin's expression grew troubled. "That depends on how many humans we can integrate before the Devourers arrive. The network needs a minimum threshold of connected minds to coordinate an effective defense. Based on current projections, we need at least 40% of Earth's population transformed within the next 2 decades. 40%? The number was staggering. That's 3 billion people. Voluntary transformation is preferable, but not required, Austin continued, his tone becoming clinical. The tower networks can be modified to process larger numbers simultaneously. Mass integration events become necessary when time constraints don't allow for individual conversion. The screens around us began showing technical schematics, massive versions of the organic technology that had transformed me, designed to handle thousands of subjects at once. The images were accompanied by projected casualty rates for various implementation scenarios, numbers that made my enhanced metabolism spike with adrenaline. "You're talking about harvesting the entire human species," I said, the full horror of the situation finally becoming clear. "We're talking about saving it," Austin replied firmly. "Along with every other species in the galaxy. The Devourers don't negotiate, Jake. They don't spare civilians or preserve cultures. They consume everything organic and leave nothing but dead rock behind. The choice isn't between transformation and freedom, it's between transformation and extinction." I wanted to argue, to find some flaw in his logic, but the evidence was overwhelming. The screens showed the remains of dozens of civilizations that had chosen to fight the Devourers on their own terms. None had survived. "How long do we have?" I asked. "The first advanced scouts will reach your outer solar system in 18 months, Austin said, manipulating the star chart to show projected arrival times. "The main fleet arrives 3 years after that. By then, the network needs to be fully operational, or everything you've ever known will be consumed." The timeline was impossibly short. Even with the tower technology, transforming billions of humans in less than 5 years would require an operation beyond anything in recorded history. And that assumed no resistance from governments, military forces, or the general population. "What about the people who refuse transformation?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Austin's enhanced features showed something that might have been regret. Non-integrated humans become a liability during Devourer encounters. Their neural patterns are chaotic, unpredictable. They interfere with network coordination and compromise defensive strategies. The towers have protocols for handling resistance. Elimination protocols. Preservation protocols, he corrected, but the distinction felt academic. Their genetic material is preserved for potential future integration. But their individual consciousness, yes, that's typically discontinued. The scope of what I was being asked to participate in was beyond genocidal. It was the systematic conversion or elimination of my entire species, justified by the threat of something even worse. And the most disturbing part was that I could feel my enhanced mind beginning to accept it as logical, necessary, even merciful. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was changing how I thought, what I valued, how I processed moral decisions. The part of me that had grown up in Phoenix, that had fixed air conditioners and worried about rent payments, was rapidly being subsumed by something that thought in terms of galactic preservation and acceptable casualty rates. "When do we start?" I heard myself asking, the words coming from some part of my mind that I didn't recognize as my own. Austin smiled, and for the first time since my transformation began, he looked genuinely pleased. "The moment you accept the implant protocols, we begin preparations for Earth integration. The towers are already being positioned in major population centers. All we need is your authorization to begin mass conversion." He gestured toward a new screen showing a control interface that apparently required my specific genetic signature to activate. The ultimate failsafe, ensuring that the harvest of humanity could only be initiated by someone who had once been human himself, someone who understood exactly what was being sacrificed and why it was necessary. The interface pulsed with that familiar organic rhythm, waiting for my decision. My enhanced fingers hovered over the control interface, feeling the organic warmth radiating from its surface. Every instinct my transformation had given me screamed that this was right, necessary, the only logical path forward. But something else, some stubborn fragment of Jake Thornfield from Phoenix, held me back. "Before I authorize anything," I said, my harmonically enhanced voice carrying more authority than I'd ever possessed as a human. I want to see the evidence. Real evidence. Show me a devourer. Austin's luminous eyes flickered with something that might have been annoyance. The network's archives contain millions of hours of documentation, sensor readings, survivor testimonies, planetary consumption analyses. Not archives, I interrupted. Live feeds. If these things are 50 years out from Earth, your network should be able to track them in real time. For the first time since my transformation, Austin hesitated. The pause lasted only a fraction of a second, but my enhanced perception caught it. That moment of uncertainty triggered something in my modified neural pathways, a warning signal that cut through the euphoria of integration. The devourers don't register on conventional sensors, Austin said carefully. Their presence can only be detected through specialized organic monitoring systems that require... Bullshit. The word came out loaded with harmonics that made the tower's organic components recoil. You've got a network spanning thousands of worlds and you can't show me a single real-time image of the greatest threat in galactic history. What kind of war preparation is this? Austin's transformed features shifted, the luminous symbols on his forehead pulsing faster. Jake, you need to trust the process. The integration chemicals in your system are designed to enhance rational thinking, but they take time to fully stabilize. Right now, you're still fighting with outdated human emotional responses. Show me a fucking devourer, Austin. The tower around us began to vibrate, its organic walls pulsing with agitation. New screens materialized, but instead of showing star charts or archived footage, they displayed biometric readings. My biometric readings. Heart rate elevated, neural activity spiking in regions associated with aggression and suspicion. And in the corner of each screen, a small notation that made my enhanced blood run cold. Subject exhibiting resistance protocols. Recommend immediate sedation. Austin saw me reading the displays and his expression changed completely. The careful concern disappeared, replaced by something predatory and calculating. The transformation process includes safeguards against this kind of reaction. Normally, the integration chemicals prevent subjects from questioning the network's directives. Your genetic compatibility is so high, it's actually interfering with the psychological conditioning. Psychological conditioning. I backed away from the control interface, my enhanced reflexes automatically scanning for exits. What the hell are you talking about? The network requires absolute loyalty from its soldiers, Jake. Doubt, moral hesitation, individual ethical frameworks. These are liabilities that compromise operational effectiveness. The transformation process eliminates them along with the physical limitations of baseline humanity. The tower's organic systems were responding to my elevated stress levels, and suddenly the chamber felt smaller. The walls were contracting, the ceiling lowering, the membrane-covered alcoves beginning to split open. Whatever was growing inside those cocoons was responding to some kind of alarm signal. You're not creating soldiers, I realized, the pieces finally clicking into place. You're creating drones, biological robots that follow orders without question. Austin's enhanced form began to change further, his skin hardening into something more chitinous than flesh. The distinction is irrelevant. What matters is operational efficiency. Individual consciousness is a luxury the galaxy can't afford when facing existential threats. And the Devourers, are they even real? Austin's transformation accelerated, his limbs elongating and his facial features becoming more angular. Oh, they're real, but not in the way you've been told. The Devourers aren't an external threat, Jake. They're the network's mobile processing units, planet-scale organisms designed to harvest biological material from worlds that have reached technological maturity. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You're feeding them. All of this, the transformation, the integration, the network. You're preparing humans as food. As raw material, Austin corrected, his voice now carrying harmonics that hurt to hear. The Devourers require specific genetic modifications to properly process organic matter. Baseline humans are nutritionally inadequate. But transformed humans, humans who've been enhanced with network biotechnology, provide the exact molecular composition the devourers need for optimal growth. The cocoons around us were splitting open faster now, revealing the things growing inside. They weren't transformed humans. They were something that had never been human at all. Insectoid creatures with too many joints and eyes that reflected the tower's organic displays. The real operators of the network, wearing human faces only when necessary to maintain the deception. The entire human space program, I said, backing toward what I hoped was still the exit membrane. The genetic manipulation, the surveillance, a centuries-long breeding program to produce the most nutritionally dense human specimens possible, Austin confirmed, his transformation now complete. He looked like a praying mantis that had learned to walk upright, covered in the same organic armor as the tower's walls. Your bloodline wasn't chosen for its compatibility with network technology, Jake. It was cultivated for its exceptional protein synthesis and neural density. You're not a soldier, you're premium livestock. The creatures from the cocoons were surrounding me now, moving with coordinated precision that spoke of hive mind intelligence. But my enhanced reflexes were faster than they'd anticipated, and when the first one lunged, I discovered that my transformed body came with more than just improved sensory perception. My fingernails, hardened into claw-like appendages, tore through the creature's chitinous armor like it was made of paper. Fluid that glowed the same blue as Austin's eyes sprayed across the chamber, and where it hit the organic walls, the material began to dissolve. The tower's immune system activated in response to the damage, flooding the chamber with a substance that felt like liquid fire against my enhanced skin. But instead of incapacitating me, it seemed to fuel some kind of berserker response. My transformation hadn't made me a compliant drone, it had made me a weapon that the network couldn't control. I fought my way through the coordinated swarm of creatures, each kill revealing more about the tower's true nature. This wasn't an outpost of some benevolent galactic civilization. It was a processing facility designed to convert raw biological material into something the devourers could consume more efficiently. The integration chambers weren't for enhancement, they were for tenderizing. Austin tried to coordinate the swarm's attacks through some kind of pheromone communication, but my enhanced perception could track the chemical signals and predict their movements. When I reached him, his mantis-like form was already preparing to molt into something even more dangerous. "You can't stop the harvest, Jake," he said, his voice now a chittering harmony of insect sounds. "The devourers are already in your solar system. The advanced scouts arrived months ago and began seeding Earth's major cities with processing towers. Your transformation was just the final step in preparing humanity for consumption." I drove my claws through his thorax, and the tower around us began to collapse as its primary coordinator died. But his final words carried a truth that made victory feel hollow. "Even if you destroy this facility, there are thousands more across the galaxy, and Earth's harvest begins whether you authorize it or not." The organic walls were dissolving around us, and through the gaps I could see the true scope of what I was dealing with. The crater wasn't a natural formation, it was a processing pit, designed to collect and concentrate biological material for transport. And rising from craters across this world's surface, I could see dozens of other towers, all pulsing with the same organic displays, all coordinating the same deception. The planetary consciousness I'd sensed since landing wasn't native to this world. It was the collective intelligence of a devourer, using the planet as a forward staging area for the harvest of Earth. And somewhere in Earth's solar system, more devourers were positioning themselves for the largest feeding event in galactic history. I had maybe hours before the tower's destruction triggered some kind of alert to the main fleet. Hours to figure out how to warn Earth about what was coming, assuming I could even get off this world alive. But first, I had to survive the collapse of a structure that had been grown rather than built, and whose death throes were turning the entire crater into a cauldron of digestive acids. The memorial to Austin Blake and the other members of the Lazarus expedition would have to be posthumous. Right now, I had 3 billion people to save from becoming lunch for cosmic parasites, assuming there was anything left of Jake Thornfield from Phoenix to do the saving. The tower's collapse triggered a chain reaction across the planet's surface. Through the dissolving organic walls, I watched distant structures begin to fold in on themselves, their bioluminescent displays flickering out one by one. But this wasn't destruction. It was evacuation. The Devourer was pulling its processing infrastructure back into the planet's core, preparing to leave. Which meant I had minutes, maybe less, before this world became uninhabitable even for my enhanced physiology. I fought my way through the liquefying remains of the chamber, my transformed reflexes allowing me to navigate collapsing passages that would have crushed a baseline human. The digestive acids that were flooding the crater stung against my modified skin but didn't penetrate. Another unintended consequence of my transformation that the network hadn't anticipated. The habitat module was still intact when I reached the crater's rim, its mechanical systems unaffected by the organic dissolution happening everywhere else. But as I approached, I realized I wasn't alone. A figure in a damaged environmental suit was crouched beside the module's airlock, working frantically with some kind of jury-rigged communication array. Dr. Michael Cavendish, the lead researcher from the Lazarus expedition, supposedly dead for weeks. "Don't fucking move," he said without looking up from his work. His voice came through external speakers, crackling with interference. "I've got this thing booby-trapped 6 ways from Sunday. You try to integrate me like you did the others, and we both go up in a ball of superheated plasma." "I'm not one of them," I said, raising my clawed hands in what I hoped looked like a peaceful gesture. "The transformation fucked up somehow. I can think for myself." Cavendish glanced at me, his faceplate reflecting the dying light of the collapsing towers. "Yeah? Prove it. Tell me something only a real human would know." Austin Blake wasn't trying to warn anyone with those radio transmissions. He was bait. The network used his voice to draw in anyone who survived the initial landing, guide them to the towers for processing. I gestured toward the crater, where the last organic structures were sinking into pools of acid. This whole world is one giant digestive system. Cavendish's shoulders sagged with relief. "Christ, you figured it out. I've been hiding in a sensor-blind cave system for 3 weeks, trying to piece together what really happened to us." He turned back to his improvised equipment. "The good news is I've managed to hack into their communication network. The bad news is fucking terrifying. Earth's already compromised. Worse than that. The harvest isn't scheduled. It's happening right now. The network's been seeding processing towers in major population centers for 6 months. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow. They're all growing network infrastructure disguised as construction projects or urban development. In 72 hours, those towers go active simultaneously." The scope of the operation was staggering. While I'd been fighting for my life in one processing facility, thousands more had been preparing to consume my entire species. How many people? Initial estimates put the first wave at about 400 million. Urban populations with the highest genetic compatibility ratings. Cavendish's voice carried the flat tone of someone who'd moved beyond horror into clinical analysis. The network's been refining their selection criteria for decades. They know exactly which bloodlines produce the most nutritionally dense specimens. There has to be a way to stop it, some kind of kill switch or centralized control system. Cavendish laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That's what I thought too. Spent 2 weeks trying to map their command structure, looking for critical nodes or central processing units. But there's no hierarchy, Jake. The network isn't controlled. It's grown. Each devourer operates independently, coordinating with the others through biological communication methods we can barely detect, let alone disrupt." The implications were crushing. No command center to attack, no single point of failure to exploit. Just a distributed organism the size of solar systems, methodically consuming everything in its path. But something in Cavendish's tone suggested he hadn't given up entirely. "You found something else," I said. "I found their weakness, but exploiting it." He gestured toward the communication array, and I could see what he'd really been building. Not a transmitter, but a weapon. The network's greatest strength is also its greatest vulnerability. Every transformed human maintains a quantum-entangled connection to the collective consciousness. Cut that connection violently enough, and the feedback cascades through the entire network. You're talking about a suicide attack. I'm talking about using my own neural pathways as a transmission medium. overload every quantum link simultaneously, burn out the biological components that coordinate the harvest. He turned to face me, his faceplate fogging with rapid breathing. The energy requirements would cook my brain in about 30 seconds, but the cascade effect would propagate faster than the network could compensate. And Earth? The towers would shut down, the devourers would lose coordination, maybe even go dormant for a few decades while they regenerate their communication infrastructure. It wouldn't stop them permanently, but it would buy Earth time to prepare proper defenses. The plan was elegant in its brutality. Use the network's own integration technology against itself, turn one transformed human into a biological virus that could crash the entire system. But there was a problem. You're not transformed, I pointed out. You don't have the neural pathways necessary to interface with their quantum links. Cavendish's expression was visible through his faceplate now, and what I saw there made my enhanced stomach clench. No, but you do. The truth hit me like a physical blow. My transformation hadn't been defective. It had been incomplete. The network had given me all the biological modifications necessary to serve as a transmission node, but the psychological conditioning had failed, which meant I was the perfect weapon to turn their own technology against them. The feedback would kill me, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew I was going to do it. Probably the neural cascade required to crash a network this size. Cavendish shook his head. I've run the calculations a dozen times. The energy discharge would fry every synapse in your brain. You'd be dead before the signal finished propagating. I looked down at my transformed hands, at the claws that had torn through Austin Blake's chitinous armor, at the metallic sheen that marked me as something no longer entirely human. 3 days ago, I'd been fixing air conditioning units in Phoenix, worried about rent and wondering if I'd ever find someone to share my shitty one-bedroom apartment with. Now I was being asked to sacrifice myself to save a species that included people who would probably shoot me on sight if they saw what I'd become. But they were still my people, still human, even if I wasn't anymore. How long do we have? I asked. The towers activate in 68 hours. The transmission needs to happen before then, or the network will be too distributed to crash effectively. Cavendish began connecting cables between his jury-rigged device and the Habitat module's power systems. There's something else, though, something you need to know before you make this choice. What? The cascade won't just affect the devourers. Every transformed human in the network, everyone who's been integrated, everyone who's undergone the enhancement process, they'll all die when the quantum links collapse. We're talking about potentially millions of people across hundreds of worlds. The weight of that revelation settled on me like a physical mass. Not just a suicide mission, but genocide on a galactic scale. Every enhanced human who'd been transformed to fight the devourers, every research team that had been integrated for their own protection, every individual who'd undergone the process voluntarily or otherwise, all of them would die to save Earth from the harvest. There has to be another way, I said, but even my enhanced brain couldn't conceive of alternatives with the time constraints we faced. Maybe there is, Cavendish said quietly. Maybe in 50 years, or 100, humanity will develop technology that can fight the devourers without requiring mass extinction of transformed humans. But we don't have 50 years, Jake. We have 68 hours. I thought about Tommy Vasquez crushed in the cargo bay, Rick O'Brien screaming as Venus's atmosphere burned his lungs, Wade Morrison frozen in terror as the cockpit filled with superheated gas, all of them dead because they trusted a mission that was designed to deliver them to slaughter. Now I had the chance to ensure their deaths meant something, to make sure no other human crews would be lured to processing worlds disguised as exploration opportunities. Set it up, I said, settling down beside Cavendish's improvised weapon. Show me how to burn out the network. As he began explaining the technical requirements for quantum cascade failure, I felt the last pieces of Jake Thornfield from Phoenix dissolving into whatever I'd become. By tomorrow, there would be no more environmental systems to repair, no more rent to worry about, no more wondering about relationships or career prospects. But 3 billion people would wake up alive, and that seemed like a fair trade for one fucked-up air conditioning technician who'd outlived his usefulness anyway. The neural interface felt like swallowing lightning. Cavendish had cobbled together a transmission array using salvaged components from 3 different civilizations' technology, all of it jury-rigged to interface with the quantum pathways the network had grown in my brain. When the connection established, I could suddenly perceive the true scope of what we were fighting. The network wasn't just galactic, it was multidimensional. Quantum threads stretched through folded space-time, connecting transformed beings across parallel universes, alternate timelines, realities where evolution had taken different paths but always led to the same endpoint: consumption by the devourers. Millions of minds linked in perfect coordination, all serving the same biological imperative. And now I was connected to all of them. Jesus Christ, I whispered, the sensory overload making my enhanced nervous system convulse. How many are there? Current estimate is 7.3 billion transformed individuals across 47,000 realities, Cavendish said, his voice coming from very far away. The network has been active for roughly 12 million years, converting organic life into biological processing units on a scale that defies comprehension. Through the quantum links, I could feel the consciousness of every transformed being in existence. Scientists from a world where silicon-based life had achieved spaceflight, warriors from a reality where humanity had never evolved, but dolphin-like creatures had developed interstellar travel, children from planets where transformation was considered a religious rite of passage. All of them had been convinced they were fighting for survival. All of them had discovered too late that they were participating in their own species' consumption. And all of them would die when I activated the cascade. The towers on Earth, I said, my voice distorting as quantum harmonics interfered with my vocal cords. I can see them through the network. They're bigger than you described. What do you mean? Not just in major cities, they're everywhere. Rural areas, small towns, even isolated research stations. The network's been planning this harvest for decades, not months. Through the quantum links, I could perceive processing facilities hidden beneath shopping malls in Phoenix, disguised as water treatment plants in Denver, integrated into subway systems in Manhattan. The initial estimate of 400 million, that was just the first wave. They're planning to process the entire human population within 6 months. Cavendish's breathing became rapid and shallow through his suit's external speakers. That changes the timeline. If they're that widely distributed, they might be able to activate early if they detect the cascade building up. How early? Hours, maybe less. The moment your neural pathways start overloading the quantum links, every tower on Earth will receive the signal. They might interpret it as an attack and begin emergency processing protocols. The implications were staggering. Instead of buying Earth decades to prepare defenses, the cascade might trigger immediate retaliation. 3 billion people could die in the next few hours, regardless of what I chose to do. The only question was whether they'd die as humans or as processed organic material. Through the network, I could sense something else approaching. Not just the devourers that were already positioning themselves around Earth's solar system, but something bigger. A command-level intelligence that had been monitoring the situation since my transformation began. The Harvester. Not one of the planet-sized processing units, but the central consciousness that coordinated the entire network across all realities. It had become aware of my presence in the quantum links and was moving to contain the threat I represented. Cavendish, I said, my voice now carrying harmonics that made the Habitat module's instruments spark. Whatever you're going to do it now. Something's coming. The cascade array needs another 30 seconds to reach optimal charge levels. If we activate too early, the quantum disruption won't propagate far enough to crash the network. 30 seconds. The Harvester's attention was like standing in the path of a collapsing star, an awareness so vast and alien that my enhanced consciousness could barely process its presence. Through the quantum links, I could feel it probing my neural pathways, searching for the source of the disruption. When it found me, the psychic impact nearly shattered my sanity. The Harvester didn't communicate in words or images. It transmitted pure concept, raw information that bypassed language entirely and carved itself directly into my brain tissue. What I received wasn't a message, it was a complete understanding of the network's true purpose. The Devourers weren't parasites, they were gardeners. Across the multiverse, organic life had a tendency to develop in cycles. Primitive organisms evolved into complex species, achieved spaceflight, spread across star systems, then inevitably consumed their resources and collapsed into extinction. The pattern repeated endlessly, with each civilization leaving behind dead worlds and wasted potential. The network had been created to break that cycle. By harvesting organic life at its peak development, converting it into transformed beings who could survive in environments that would kill baseline organisms, then feeding the processed material to the devourers for distribution to sterile worlds in need of biological seeding. It wasn't consumption, it was conservation. The network was preserving organic life by spreading it beyond the limitations of individual planetary ecosystems. Every transformed human would become part of a vast biological library, their genetic material and consciousness preserved for future cultivation on worlds that needed life. The revelation should have been comforting. Instead, it was horrifying. Because I could see the flaw in their logic, the fundamental mistake that 12 million years of existence hadn't taught them. They were preserving biological material, but they were destroying everything that made life worth preserving. Culture, individuality, the chaotic beauty of unguided evolution, all of it was being homogenized into a sterile network of identical consciousness. They were saving life by killing everything that made life meaningful. 20 seconds, Cavendish announced. The harvester's attention shifted from analysis to action. Through the quantum links, I felt processing towers across hundreds of worlds receive activation signals. Not just Earth, every planet in the network with human populations was being ordered to begin immediate harvesting. The harvester had decided that preserving the network took priority over maintaining the harvest schedule. Billions of humans across multiple realities were about to die because I'd tried to save them. Fuck the charge levels, I said, reaching for the cascade array's activation controls. Do it now. Jake, if the quantum disruption isn't properly calibrated, it doesn't matter. They're starting the harvests early. Every second we wait, more people die. My enhanced reflexes allowed me to activate the cascade before Cavendish could stop me. The quantum array discharged directly into my neural pathways, flooding the network's communication links with feedback that propagated at faster than light speeds across dimensional barriers. The effect was immediate and absolute. Every transformed being in the network, 7 billion conscious entities across 47,000 realities, died simultaneously. Their quantum-entangled neural pathways overloaded instantly, releasing energy bursts that cascaded through the biological infrastructure of every devourer in existence. Through my disintegrating consciousness, I felt the network collapse. Processing towers across the multiverse went dark. Devourer organisms the size of planets convulsed as their nervous systems burned out. The harvester's vast intelligence fragmented into screaming chaos as its command-level awareness dissolved into quantum static. But the cascade was killing me too. My enhanced nervous system, designed to interface with the quantum links, couldn't handle the feedback from 7 billion simultaneous deaths. I could feel my synapses burning out one by one, my consciousness fragmenting as the energy discharge cooked my brain tissue. In my final moments of awareness, I caught glimpses of Earth through dying sensor networks. The processing towers were collapsing, their organic components dissolving as the quantum cascade reached them. But the damage had already begun. In New York, London, Tokyo, millions of people were trapped in towers that had activated just before the cascade hit. They were dying as humans, not as processed biological material, but they were still dying. The cascade had worked, but not completely, not cleanly. Humanity would survive as a species, but the cost would be measured in the tens of millions. Cities would have to be rebuilt. Entire populations would need to be relocated. And somewhere in the ruins, investigators would find evidence of the network's existence, forcing humanity to confront the knowledge that they weren't alone in a universe that wanted to preserve them by destroying everything they valued. My last coherent thought was a prayer that they'd learn from the network's mistake, that they'd find a way to spread life across the stars without losing the chaotic, beautiful, meaningless randomness that made existence worth experiencing. Then the cascade reached the quantum pathways in my brainstem, and Jake Thornfield from Phoenix, Arizona, air conditioning technician, unwilling hero, accidental savior of the human species, ceased to exist. The silence that followed was absolute, profound, and mercifully brief before the Habitat module's failing life support systems filled it with the sound of alarms that no one was left alive to hear. September 23, 2159. 2 years since the towers fell, and I still wake up every morning expecting to find spiral symbols carved into my bedroom walls. The therapist says it's survivor guilt, mixed with what she politely calls residual xenophobic trauma response. What she means is that watching 47 million people dissolve into organic soup while trapped inside buildings that were supposed to be shopping centers and office complexes tends to fuck with your head. I was in Denver when it happened, lucky enough to be outside the processing radius when Tower Complex 7 activated, close enough to see the light show when it collapsed. The official investigation blamed experimental geothermal systems, and most people bought that explanation because the alternative, admitting that humanity had been targeted for consumption by multidimensional parasites, was too insane to process. But some of us know better. The ruins tell a different story if you know how to read them. I've spent 26 months cataloguing recovered artifacts from 17 different tower sites, and the pattern is undeniable. Biological technology that doesn't match any known terrestrial origin. Structural materials that exhibit quantum entanglement properties, and in every location, traces of human DNA that's been modified in ways our current science can't replicate. The Venus mission records were classified immediately after the towers fell, but I managed to access fragments through a contact at NASA. Jake Thornfield, Tommy Vasquez, Rick O'Brien, Wade Morrison, 4 men who were supposed to be establishing a research station on Titan but somehow ended up on a world that shouldn't exist according to our star charts. Only Thornfield made it past the initial landing, and what happened to him during those final days reads like fever dream transcribed by someone having a psychotic breakdown, except the physical evidence supports every impossible detail. I found traces of his modified genetic material in the Denver site's collapsed central processing chamber, DNA that shows systematic enhancement beyond anything in our current biomedical capabilities, combined with neural tissue that exhibits properties consistent with quantum communication interfaces. Whatever Jake Thornfield became during his time on that world, he used those modifications to crash a network spanning thousands of civilizations across multiple realities. The math is staggering. Conservative estimates suggest he killed over 7 billion conscious beings to save humanity from consumption. 7 billion entities who were once like us, transformed against their will into biological processing units for creatures that saw organic life as nothing more than renewable resources. The question that keeps me awake isn't whether he made the right choice. It's whether we learned anything from it. Because the towers are growing back, not the same organic structures that dissolved during the cascade, but something new. Smaller, more subtle, harder to detect. They're appearing in rural areas first, abandoned farms in Kansas, forgotten mining towns in Montana, places where people disappear and nobody asks questions. Local populations report strange dreams, unusual wildlife behavior, and an increasing number of residents who seem different after spending time in the affected areas. Blood work shows genetic modifications consistent with the Venus samples, but at a much slower rate of progression. Whatever intelligence coordinated the original harvest is adapting, learning from the network's failure. Instead of mass processing events, it's implementing gradual integration, converting humans one by one, small communities at a time, building towards some new form of coordination that won't be vulnerable to quantum cascade disruption. I've submitted reports to every relevant agency, but the response is always the same. The threat was neutralized, the towers are gone, humanity is safe. Anyone suggesting otherwise gets reassigned to less sensitive positions. Tonight, I'm driving to a town called Millbrook, population 847, in rural Nebraska. 3 weeks ago, their local newspaper stopped publishing. Phone service went intermittent 2 weeks later. Yesterday, satellite imagery showed new construction in the town center, a spiral pattern that shouldn't exist, but somehow does. My Geiger counter has been clicking softly since I crossed the state line. 47 million people died to buy us time, but I think our grace period is running out.